episode 247 of the Aggressive Progressive Podcast. We have a verdict. What's next? Let's start the show.
We are now the defenders of the stronghold of democracy and of equal opportunity.
You and I, as citizens, have the obligation to shape the debates of our time, not only with the votes we cast, but with the voices we lift.
The people are looking for honest answers, not easy answers.
The very word secrecy is repugnant.
Clear leadership.
And we are, as a people,
not false claims and evasiveness and politics as usual.
Opposed to secret society.
But ours was a nation of the ballot, not the bullet.
And a secret pursuit.
As a people, we cannot afford to let any group of citizens or any individual citizen live or labor under conditions which are injurious to the common welfare.
Black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, young, old, gay, straight, men, women, folks with disabilities, all pledging allegiance under the same proud flag to this big, bold country that we love. That's what I see. That's the America I know.
Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America.
Welcome to the Aggressive Progressive Podcast. I am your host, Chris Hahn, at Christopher Hahn on X, Christopher Hahn NY on Instagram, and ChristopherHahn.com. Thank you for liking, rating, reviewing, telling your friends about the podcast. We continue to grow. What a week, America! Don't think we got them, but we got them a little bit. I don't know about you, but my data shows that suburban women, they don't like convicted felons. They don't tend to change their vote to support convicted felons, especially ones who have who are convicted of covering up an affair with a porn star. I just don't see this helping Trump. Now, I know that you've probably been hearing on most of these stations all day long how great this is for Donald Trump, that he had a great fundraising effort. Well, I've looked at data. Been looking at data my whole life. I've been looking at data this entire election cycle. And I will tell you that 10% of voters, 10% of Trump's base voters, said that if he's convicted of a felony, that they will consider not voting for him. Well, he's been convicted of a felony. And I don't think that all 10% of them will eventually not vote for him. But I think that 3 or 4% of them will. And that's enough. That's enough. So you'll hear a lot today about what he should or shouldn't do and who he is and who he isn't. It doesn't matter. The cake is baked. He is now a felon. And if I was Joe Biden's team, I would make that a central part of the campaign, that he is a convicted felon. And he is a convicted felon of a crime that involved him covering up an affair he had with a porn star days after his wife gave birth to their son, Barron. I don't know how that helps him. I know that, you're probably listening to this station and maybe, not all these stations are conservative, but the vast majority of the stations I'm on are. I know that you're probably hearing this and saying, oh, come on. This is just a fix. It's a rig. Look, Trump's attorneys picked that jury too. They didn't even use all of their preemptory challenges, which means that they thought that some of those jurors would be sympathetic to them in a way that was probably not fair. Trump himself was involved with the selection of the jury. The jury heard the evidence. They saw the facts. They didn't see the spin from people like me or people like you're hearing on the radio, other parts of the day. They heard the facts and they made a judgment based on the facts. You could say all you want about the judge. Oh, his daughter's a liberal activist. Okay, well, you know what? There are a lot of conservative Republicans in office whose daughters are liberal activists, just for the record. It's a thing, right? Young people tend to be more liberal. Just happens. America, I'm never happy to see somebody being convicted. It's not really a thing for me. I even if they deserve it, and I think Trump does. But I think now he's wearing a scarlet F to go along with the scarlet A. And that's not good for him politically. People are going to gnash their teeth and say what they want, and maybe they should have never brought it, and the DOJ passed on it. Look, the DOJ passed on this because he was president of the United States at the time. The person who he paid to do this crime went to jail for 3 years for this crime. So, let's be very, very clear. This was not a selected prosecution. This was not something that shouldn't have been brought. And I'll also throw one more thing at you. He could have pled this out. He could have, worked with the DA and pled it out to a misdemeanor or paid a fine, whatever. He didn't want to do that. He chose to go to trial. I think that we need to hold our elected officials to a higher standard, not a lower standard. I don't think you get a pass because you're president. I think because you're president, we should judge you a little bit more severely. I think that that's what we should do. All those people out there saying we shouldn't be prosecuting him, he shouldn't be getting charged. He should be charged. He should be on trial right now in Florida for the documents case. But for, you want to talk about a judge who's biased? Aileen Cannon. But for Aileen Cannon, he'd be on trial right now. Believe me, he'd be convicted of that one too. He should be on trial right now for the January 6th stuff. But for 5 conservative justices on the United States Supreme Court, 6, he'd be on trial for that too right now. And he'd be convicted for that too. Don't cry for the guy. He'll be fine, but he's not going to be president. Listen to this. We'll be right back. Welcome back, I am your host, Chris Hahn. I'm at Christopher Hahn on X, Christopher Hahn NY on Instagram, and ChristopherHahn.com. Those are my socials. Watch me on News Nation. I'm on all the time. Just got off the air a few moments ago talking about the Trump stuff. I'll be on probably whenever you turn on your TV, but if you follow me on X or Instagram, you'll see my shirt and tie. Generally, I almost always do it. I've been forgetting a little bit lately, and people are like, how come I don't see your shirt and tie on Instagram? I'm like, well, sometimes I rush and I miss things. So back to the trial of Donald Trump, the conviction of Donald Trump and what it means going forward. I mean, everybody's like, what does it mean for Trump? How is this going to help Trump? It's not going to help Trump. It is not going to help Trump. Get it through your thick head. Being a convicted felon for a crime like this does not help you. People who are going to support you no matter what will continue to support you no matter what. People who were wavering on whether or not they support you are going to be swayed in the other direction because of this. And I think it's incumbent on Democrats to hammer this every day. He is a felon, convicted by a jury of his peers, a jury that Donald Trump himself helped select. They didn't even use all their preemptory challenges. They had 5 preemptories left. They could have knocked 5 of these jurors off the jury. Oh, but it's Manhattan. Everybody's a liberal in Manhattan. No, everybody is not a liberal in Manhattan. I get it. Donald Trump got like 15% of the vote in Manhattan. Yeah, that's still 100,000 people who voted for him in Manhattan. Probably more votes than he got in Wyoming. So, let's just be very clear for a second. There are definitely people in Manhattan who are conservatives. And I also say this, it doesn't matter what the jury is. The jurors take their jobs very seriously in this country. We have a very effective, fair system of justice, particularly if you are wealthy and can afford any kind of lawyer you want, which Donald Trump claims to be, apparently is. was getting funded for this by little old ladies sending $5 a month to him anyway. So, he had the money for the best legal defense you could possibly have. He chose not to take the stand, right? Let's point this out. Donald Trump says he wanted to take the stand, but wasn't allowed to. That is not true either. Donald Trump was perfectly allowed to take the stand. He chose not to take the stand. He took the advice of his lawyers, by the way, good advice, and didn't take the stand. So I'm sure, he's having a press conference later today. It might be on before this show's on in some of your markets. I'm taping this in the morning today. I usually tape it the night before, but I'm taping it in the morning today. You might hear a little morning voice for me. He'll come out today and he'll say, "Oh, they didn't let me talk." Of course they let you talk. You could have testified. You could have testified. You would have then been subject to cross-examination. And you would have been found out for the fraud you are by those jurors. It would have been worse. The conviction wouldn't have taken 2 days. It would have taken 10 minutes if you would have taken the stand. The gag order. He's going to complain about the gag order. Well, the gag order is lifted now. Now you have all the time in the world to campaign, which, by the way, he won't. Donald Trump won't be out on the campaign trail hitting 5 states a day. Not going to happen. Donald Trump will campaign maybe once a week. He'll do a rally somewhere close to his golf courses. And that'll be it. Because he's a lazy campaigner. He didn't campaign. He didn't campaign during the trial on the days that there were no trials. He went and played golf or did something else. Had dinner at Mar-a-Lago. I guess it was shellfish night or something. And I hear they have very good lobster claws. I don't know. But believe me, America, he's not going to be out there pounding the pavement to get reelected. He'll do press conferences. He'll call into Fox News. But he is not going to be out there vigorously I got to get to Arizona today. I got to get to Florida. No, not going to happen. Not going to happen. The gag order's lifted. Say whatever the hell you want about Michael Cohen. I don't know what else you could say that your lawyer hadn't already said in court. He called him the gloat, the greatest liar of all time. And I got to admit, good line. Turns out didn't matter because everything Michael Cohen said on that stand was corroborated by other people, including people like Hoop Hicks, who were Donald Trump loyalists. So here we are. Now the trial of Donald Trump is over and the trial of America is on. Are we going to put a convicted felon back in the White House? I got to tell you, I don't think we are. Barring some crazy event involving Joe Biden over the next 6 months, Donald Trump's not going anywhere. He's going back to Mar-a-Lago. He's not going to jail either, just for the record. But he's going back to Mar-a-Lago. He'll play golf. He'll enjoy the rest of his life. I hope. I mean, if he loses and then wants to run again and Republicans are still with him, they are just crazy. The reaction from Republican lawmakers should have been, this is a convicted felon. He shouldn't be our candidate. And they still have a chance to nominate somebody else. They should take it. Listen to this. I'll be right back. Can we just talk for a minute about all of these people on social media and elsewhere comparing Donald Trump to Jesus Christ? Saying that Jesus Christ had a sham trial. Yeah, I remember Jesus Christ's attorneys picking the jury that decided to nail Jesus to the cross. No, Donald Trump's attorneys, with the help of Donald Trump, picked the jury that convicted him. You do realize this, right? They picked the jury that convicted him, and they had 5 challenges that they could have used to get rid of these jurors for any reason whatsoever. They didn't like the tie the guy was wearing or whatever. They could have just Preemptory challenges, they're called. I don't want to get all legalistic on you. But they did pick this jury. And before you tell me that, there are no Republicans in New York County, well, Donald Trump got like 85,000 votes in Manhattan. That's more than any county in Wyoming. More than any 2 counties in Wyoming. More votes than he got in any 2 counties in Wyoming. There are Republicans in Manhattan who they could have, and there are also people who don't vote at all. Lots of people who don't vote at all in Manhattan. And some of them, I bet, were on this jury. And he only needed to convince one of the 12 that there was reasonable doubt and he would not have been convicted on all 34 charges. But back to this, Trump is Jesus meme. Like, Jesus Christ didn't cheat on his wife days after she gave birth with a porn star while promising her a stint on The Apprentice. I've read the Bible several times. Never saw that. Yet Jesus did, get Mary Magdalene to stop being a prostitute. But he didn't, cheat on a wife. He just didn't have a wife. There was none of that. I also remember Jesus saying something about rich men and getting into heaven being pretty difficult, like a camel going through the eye of a needle. You might want to read the Bible before you compare Donald Trump to Jesus Christ. I don't even like it when he compares himself to Abraham Lincoln. I can't stand it, frankly. He says he's better than Lincoln, which is a ridiculous statement. He's actually said he's done more for African Americans than Abe Lincoln has. Think about that statement for a minute. How? Why don't you ask the exonerated 5 how much he's done for African Americans? Why don't you ask some people who were trying to rent from him and his father over the decades how good he was to African Americans? But comparing himself to Jesus, comparing himself to George Washington, that he was a better president than George Washington. Well, the thing about George Washington knew when it was time to leave, right? It's to me beyond bizarre that regular Republicans. Let's stop with the regular Republicans for a minute. Let's talk about the evangelical types, the Ralph Reeds of the world. How they are still standing next to this guy. The Jerry Falwell Jr.'s of the world. I mean, I guess he's got his own problems, right? How these evangelical, Christo-nationalists, I guess I'll call them, because I don't really think they're Christians, are not just so ashamed of themselves for being associated with him. There was a time not that long ago when both parties had shame. And if somebody did something shameful, they left Congress. I mean, ask Katie Hill, who got elected in 2018 and resigned because she had an affair with a staffer on her congressional campaign, a consensual relationship with a staffer. She resigned. Used to be when you got found out that you were having an affair with a porn star, you resigned in shame. America was better off when shame was a thing, was a nonpartisan thing. Now we've got a guy who plays by the Roy Cohn playbook, never apologize, never admit you were guilty. And now he's got to go to a sentencing 5 days before a debate, 5 days before the convention. And one of the ways you get your sentence reduced is you show remorse for your crimes. I don't think he's been showing any remorse whatsoever, nor do I expect him to show any remorse between now and the time of his sentencing. And he sure as hell is not going to say he's sorry to Judge Merchan, who he called the devil. Of course, he wouldn't know what a devil is because he's never really read the Bible. Trump's press conference Friday, he never fails to miss an opportunity to show the world he can rise above anything other than what's like personally motivating him at that moment. Probably going to be the biggest television audience he will ever have. I don't think the convention will be bigger. I don't think the debates will be, well, maybe the debates will be. Could have outlined to the American people what his plan was. Could have said, yes, I was convicted of a felony. I am still running for president of the United States. My legal problems are my own personal problems, but here are the problems America has, and here's what I'm going to do to fix it. Instead, he behaved like the whiny little cur he is and ranted for 40 minutes or so, took no questions from the assembled press. Wah, 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 me, 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 me. Elections are never about the candidate. They are about the people the candidate hopes to get to vote for him. Donald Trump makes everything about him. Here's the other thing. Usually when there's an incumbent president, you want the election to be a referendum on that president. Are things good? Are things bad? And even though things are pretty good in this country, a lot of people feel like they're still bad. And how people feel is more important than how things really are. Stock market's at an all-time high. You ask people, 50% of Americans say the stock market's in decline. Unemployment's at a 60-year low. People say unemployment is high. Yeah, inflation sucks. It sucks. I don't even like it. $5 for a cup of coffee at Starbucks. I'm not going anymore. It's getting ridiculous. That's not true. I'm addicted. I'm going to keep going. But I get it. Elections are about perception. And in a year where people feel the way they do, if you could make it a referendum on the incumbent, you have a very good chance of winning. Donald Trump is incapable of making it a referendum on the incumbent. Instead, he's going to make it a choice between himself and Joe Biden. A choice that, assuming Joe Biden doesn't fall flat on his face at these debates, and I'm pretty sure he won't, they're going to choose Joe Biden. They're not going to choose the guy who was just convicted of a felony because he had unprotected sex with a porn star days after his wife gave birth to their son Barron and then paid her to cover it up. And in the process manipulated his records, and that's why he was convicted of a felony. I don't have to go into that much detail for it because guess what? That doesn't matter. It really doesn't. He was convicted of a felony around the cover-up of his sexual affair with a porn star. Yeah. How are suburban women in Philadelphia or in outside Detroit, how are they going to feel about that? I'm sure they love that. Sure, they're going to love that. I'm sure that's going to make them much more likely to vote for this pig. No, it will not. I'm just, I'm still waiting for reasonable Republicans to stand up and say, enough with this and we're going to move on. They should. They have one more chance to at their convention. They won't because they're cowards. Larry Hogan on Thursday, before the verdict was even announced, when it was told that there was going to be a verdict, but they hadn't come back yet, he tweeted out, let's all respect the process and the verdict and move on. And Donald Trump's campaign manager said to Larry Hogan, who is a Republican running for Senate, a seat that the Republicans hope to pick up in Maryland, your campaign is now over. Because you're not, he tweeted that at him because he's not sufficiently loyal to Donald Trump, right? The only loyal response to Donald Trump in that scenario is, it's rigged. It's a rigged game. It's rigged. Here's the thing about Donald Trump. When he wins, everything's fair. Everything's great. When he loses, it's rigged. And I haven't interviewed anybody who grew up with Donald Trump. Somebody who maybe went to that military boarding school with him for like 2 years. Pretty sure that's probably how he behaved when he was a little brat at boarding school. When he won, everything was great. When he lost, people were cheating. Right? That's the way it is with guys who've born with a silver spoon in their mouth. You know who those guys are. If you're listening to me, you know who they are. Born with a silver spoon in the mouth. Get whatever they want, whenever they want. And when they don't win, they say the game was rigged. They say the game wasn't fair. You're playing Monopoly with them. You have Boardwalk and Park Place with hotels on it. They land on it rather than paying you and going bankrupt. They flip the board over. That's who Donald Trump is. He's a whiny little cur, and he should never be near the White House again. Convicted felon. Horrible. Listen to this. I'll be right back. They picked a jury in the Hunter Biden trial on Monday. You know, the trial on the gun charge that the Supreme Court may or may not said in a recent case is probably an unconstitutional law. Here's what I'm not going to do. I am not going to demagogue around whatever happens in this trial. It's a jury trial. I believe in the jury system. Seems to me a pretty cut and dry case if they can prove two elements, right? The law is that he had to be addicted to drugs at the time he signed this form to get a firearm, and he had to have purchased a firearm. The government has to prove those two things to convict him, and they have ample resources to do it. I will not be going down to the courthouse with a blue tie on or a red tie on or any kind of tie that Hunter or Joe Biden are wearing to do a press conference like a fool, because I'm not a fool. And if the verdict comes back guilty, you will not hear me say that it was rigged. It's not going to happen. Now, I know that conservatives think that anybody at any time should have a gun. Many conservatives have fought for rules that would allow more terrorists to get guns. Because how do we know they're terrorists? How do we know you're a terrorist? How do we know you're a drug addict? That's really the question of this law, which is why the Supreme Court will probably be, grounds for appeal on this, just like every other thing. But there'll be no demagoguery around this by the Democratic Party in the same way that the Republican Party has been, whining and gnashing their teeth over the ruling in New York last week. There'll be none of that around what happens with Hunter. Here's my thoughts on Hunter. He was a troubled guy. He was a troubled guy who was trying to get help, who has a troubled past, and we all know somebody like Hunter. You've heard me say this before. I had a brother who died who was just like Hunter. Troubled his entire life. Problems with drugs his entire life. And in the end, it wasn't the drugs that killed him. It was the wear and tear on his body that all those years of abusing it with drugs, hard drugs, did to him. I would give anything to have my brother back. And if my brother was being prosecuted, I'd be at his side defending him. Just as Joe Biden has said he respects and loves and is proud of his son. And Jill Biden showed up in court on Monday to support her stepson, who she raised from a very young age. That's what families should do. They should show up for each other. They should support each other. Having a father who's president of the United States when you've had a drug problem in your life obviously creates more problems for you. But by all accounts right now, the man has his drug problem under control. And that's a very difficult thing for anybody who knows anybody who's been through this knows it's a very difficult thing to do. So whatever happens in this trial, I don't care. I'm going to trust the jury system. I know that if he gets off, you will hear lots of cries of rigged justice system or two-tiered justice system. You'll hear it. It won't be true. There are lots of ways to cast reasonable doubt whether or not this guy was aware at the time he signed that form that he had a drug addiction. Or was he on drugs that day? I don't know. He's not going to take the stand. I sure as hell wouldn't take the stand if I was him. But you're going to hear lots of lurid details about his life. Texts, testimony from ex-wives, ex-girlfriends, ex-users that used with him. You're going to hear all that. And it'll be wonderful. But again, he's not running for president of the United States. The guy who was convicted on 34 felony counts in New York, counts that stemmed from his affair with a porn star that he had days after the birth of his son, Barron. He is actually running for president of the United States. He wants to be the president of the United States. On the Republican line, remember the party of family values? So, again, I don't think everybody who believes in family values is a hypocrite. I think some of them are. I think a lot of them are. But not all of them. And it doesn't take all of them to walk away from the guy for him to lose. And if you look at the polling over the weekend, the wall is starting to crack. It's going to be a flood soon. And he's not going to win. Listen to this. I'll be right back. Welcome back. I am your host, Chris Hahn, at Christopher Hahn on X, Christopher Hahn NY on Instagram, and ChristopherHahn.com. Of course, watch me on News Nation. I'm on all the time. News Nation is news for all Americans. It plays it straight. It is not Newsmax. Please do not confuse it with Newsmax. Newsmax is something completely different. They are news for people who are just looking to hate everything and have grievances all day long. News Nation plays it down the middle. You get opinion guys like me on there, but the hosts are not trying to steer the ship, too far left or right. They try to keep it down the middle, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. The polling that came out right after the verdict, polls were taken, of course, over the weekend, showed still a very tight race, but here's the thing that caught my attention. And again, I don't think polls reacting to news are ever very accurate. They are a knee-jerk reaction to the people getting questioned based on the news that had just broken. I like to give things 2 or 3 weeks to settle down and then take a poll and see where people are on the same issues. But here's the number that caught my attention. 67% of the double haters in one of the polls that came out of the weekend, one of the good polls, I think it was the ABC Ipsos poll, but don't quote me on that. 67% of the double haters thought that this was a significant development and that Donald Trump should end his campaign for president. Who are the double haters? The people who don't like Trump or Biden, right? The people who many of us think will be the deciding votes in the election. People who are planning on voting but don't like either of these guys. For a variety of reasons. Maybe they think Biden's too old. Maybe they're worried about the economy. They think Trump's a scoundrel, because he is. I mean, that's an old-fashioned word, but you know what I mean. It's those people who are persuadable voters, and there aren't that many of them, right? They make up probably about 10 to 15% of the electorate at most, and I think that's even a wild swing, right? They poll independents, and independents basically come out almost the exact same way as Democrats and Republicans do. That's because most independents aren't really independent. They are right-leaning or left-leaning independents. But the double haters, they don't like either of them. They don't like either party. Some of them might vote third party. But when 67% of them think that this was a serious development, these are serious charges, and he should suspend his campaign, that is a number I will be watching 3 or 4 weeks from now when things settle down and these numbers actually matter, right? I mean, this is the thing, America. The media wants to have you obsess on the horse race. The horse race is easy. The horse race matters the last 2 or 3 weeks of the election. The horse race does not matter that much in June. It's beginning to matter. It matters more every week we get closer to the election, but it's still not a place where it's like, oh my God. And more importantly, national polls rarely matter, right? We want to see what's going on in the states that are going to determine this election, right? Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, right? North Carolina, maybe. You want to expand it to Ohio and Florida? Go ahead, but those have been, it's like Lucy in the football for Democrats for the last couple of years. They always look like they're going to go a certain way or that they're in play, but then they're not, right? I think Pennsylvania is that way for Trump, too. It looks like it's in play, but it's really not. Michigan, Wisconsin, those are two different stories, but I really have a good feeling about Michigan and Wisconsin. You say, why does Chris have a good feeling about Michigan and Wisconsin for Joe Biden? I'll tell you why. They have two outstanding Democratic organizations. Ben Wickler in Wisconsin, who is the head of the Wisconsin Democrats, of course, Democratic governor in Wisconsin. They've been winning elections, statewide elections, honestly, handily the last couple of cycles. And they've organized the hell out of that state. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, is also a fantastic political leader. And they have built up this grassroots organization that gets the vote out in Michigan. And if you're talking about two states where collectively we're looking at about 50,000 votes in two different states, maybe deciding the presidency, organization on the ground matters. Now, Trump's been boasting that he raised, tens of millions of dollars since the verdict. And I don't doubt that he's raised a lot. But I am dubious on the numbers he's throwing out there. I don't believe he raised $54 million in 3 days. I just don't. He has a huge fundraising deficit to the Democrats. But if the numbers that he put out there the last couple of days are accurate, it's going to narrow somewhat. But he has been closing down these regional offices that the RNC set up, these outreach centers. And he's been focusing that money on his own personal problems. And anybody who listened to Lara Trump over the weekend, Lara Trump was on the morning shows. It's pretty clear what the Republican Party is up to. The Republican Party has one goal, and that is the protection of Donald Trump, not even necessarily the election of Donald Trump. So that means if they have to spend all of their resources on his legal defense. Now, I think that'd be ridiculous. I don't think anybody needs a $140 million legal defense. They would. The Republicans went after Larry Hogan, who is their candidate for the United States Senate in Maryland, a guy who has a chance to flip a blue state because he was a very popular Republican governor there. Prior to the verdict, he said, let's respect the verdict, which is, what you should say when you're running for Senate. And Donald Trump's campaign manager said, your campaign is over. And Lara Trump backed that up. The chairwoman, the co-chair, I guess is her title, of the Republican National Committee, Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, backed up Trump's campaign manager saying, maybe he should be more supportive of Trump. No way to run a railroad, America. No way to win elections. That doesn't mean it's over. Please. I went on TV and I said, it's over for him. We're not sending a felon to the White House. That is true right now. But could change, right? It could change if Joe Biden shows up to the debate and can't speak in complete sentences. That would change things, don't you think? Or if there's some other physical problem with Joe Biden. That means you got to stay on your toes. You got to work really hard. Run through the tape, as they say in racing. Don't stop until the race is won. All right. I think you've all had enough of me for one day, so I'm going to remind you now, as I always do, to seek the truth. Question everyone and everything, even me. Seek the truth. I know it's out there, and I know you'll find it if you look for it. And I'll be back here again next week to tell you the truth as I see it. I'm Chris Hahn. Thanks for listening to the Aggressive Progressive Podcast.